Hello, beauties, and welcome to another episode of Aesthetic Chat with Kiki. I'm your host, Kiana Gamble, and I'm so excited to have this duo on today. They are a mother-daughter duo, my very first that I'm ever interviewing together, but this one's a good one. I have Connie Brennan and Savannah Brennan on with me today, and they're going to talk all things aesthetics. Connie is another OG, as we call it, in the industry. Her daughter has started during the pandemic, but I'm really excited to hear from the both of them. So definitely enjoy this one, beauties. Ladies, so welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. So I'll have Connie start. We'll start by having you talk about your story and your journey into the aesthetic industry, and then we'll have you, Savannah, kind of piggyback off her.
Perfect. So this is Connie Brennan, and I'm a nurse practitioner in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and here to talk a little bit about aesthetic medicine and the journey that I took getting into aesthetics. Original journey was a love for the arts, and I was a photographer, had opened up a portrait studio when I was 18, and thought I would be a great photographer for the rest of my life, and that would be my journey. And as I'm working in the studio and hiring and working with portraits, my job was to not only take all the portraits and work with lights and shadows, but to retouch portraits that came back from the studio. And we would use easels and paints and dryers because back then digital didn't exist. So I'm dating myself a little bit, but at the end of the day, I loved it, but realized that the finances weren't so great back then for photographers, and it was challenging to pay the bills. And knowing that I also loved medicine, and one of my childhood dreams was to become a doctor, but because of poverty, college really wasn't in my future. When I was that age, I decided to apply for a grant to go to a technical college program in hopes that that would maybe pay the bills and I would do my photography on the side. So I was able to get a grant for a couple $1,000s, and back then that was a lot of money. And I went to a medical assisting program through a technical college and graduated. And at that graduation, a woman came up to me. And so she came up to me after the graduation ceremony and said, "I'd like you to consider an internship with our office." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Well, we're a plastic surgery practice and we're looking for a clinical photographer and an assistant. So since you have kind of both of those things under your belt, I think you would be a really great fit." And I thought, well, that's great. So I'll get a full-time job and then I'll do my photography nights and weekends, which I did. And after working there for just a few months, they hired me full-time, and I fell in love with the world of plastic surgery and started working a lot in their operating room and working with patients and did all the things there that a nurse would have done at the time. And they trained me in so many things, and the experience was great. And I fell in love with it. So I decided, why am I not going back to school for nursing since I'm doing most of the things that the nurses are doing here? So I went back to school nights and weekends to become a nurse. And it took me about 5 years to get my 2-year RN because I had to go nights and weekends, and did photography and music on the weekends as well. And then I fell in love with the idea of injecting, and the doctors did it at the time. And we only had one product back in the early 90s called collagen, or bovine collagen. And it came from a cow, and we had to skin test for 30 days before placing it in patients. And so I did that. And I asked the doctors, can I please, I just graduated from nursing. I'd love to be able to inject collagen in patients. And our doctor said, that is a doctor's job. And that was that. And I thought, well, we inject lidocaine into patients in the operating room. We're injecting fat transfers into patients. And, why can't we inject collagen? So I called the collagen company one day. I thought, I'm just going to call them and find out if there's any nurses across the country doing this. And the collagen company said, we actually have a couple, here and there, more on the coasts. We don't have anybody in Minnesota. And I said, well, are you willing to come and train in Minnesota and for a nurse? And they said, sure, but you have to take this test and take this test, and then we'll send someone out to train you, and you'll schedule a couple days of patients, and we'll send the trainer out to you after your test is passed. And I thought, okay, good. That's great. Send me the material and I'll study it and take the test. So I wrapped another nurse into it. I said, hey, would you want to do this with me? Of course, I didn't want to get in trouble with my doctor because back then, what the doctor said went, and that was that. And she was the favorite nurse. So I said, I thought if I get her involved, then, they won't yell at me. I'll just get her involved with me. So we both studied, we both took the test, and the college and company sent out a trainer, and her and I scheduled patients for ourselves. And this would probably never fly today because of just everything. But so we had 2 patients and we did our 2-day training, and the doctor stomped through our room here and there, mad as ever, because we had done this kind of without his blessing. But needless to say, at the end of the day, we both got certified in college and training, and we started to schedule patients. And the doctor did not like injecting anyway. So I think he was almost, at the end of the day, relieved that we were starting to see patients. He would have much rather been in surgery all day. That's his skills. And so then I went to negotiate with him about our pay. Because after a while, I thought, I'm just making a nurse's pay and I'm making the company all this money. Why am I not getting paid a little bit more each hour? So I went to negotiate my pay. And I think he was a little surprised by that. I think he thought that was really brazen. And actually, I thought it was a little bit too. And I was a little nervous, but I was young and sassy and in my 20s and thought, why not? Why not do that? So I was able to secure a little bit higher hourly pay for both of us for the hours that we injected. And thus began the journey of my aesthetic business, because I decided to make some changes and leave that practice after I gave birth to my first child, which was Savannah. And I went to work for a facial plastic surgeon because I really wanted to study faces really closely versus just the overall body that I had done. I had now been in plastic surgery 8 years.
I love your story. I love that it's very like women empowering. Even back then, you're like going out and doing things that you're like, no, this is what I'm going to be doing. And you're kind of going to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
I do want to ask really quick though, with your like background in photography, what is one of like the number one mistakes you're seeing with, people doing before and afters?
I think before and afters, the key component to before and afters, depending on what type of instruments you're using, whether it's an iPad, an iPhone, anything like that, the thing that's important is consistency in clinical photography. So whatever way you have that patient, the very first time you take their picture, you want to identify how to make that consistent with their after. So that's probably the biggest thing, is take their before and after with consistent lighting, consistent depth. That means that you're standing in the same position that you stood where you took them the first time, or you're sitting, and so the lighting, the makeup is off the patient, the hair is off the face, so you can see what you're looking at, and then having the proper lights and shadows, because if you have too much light on the face, it blanches the face out. So the ring lights that we're all using to make us look beautiful on, Zoom calls are not the things you really want to put in front of the patient's face when you're taking their photo, because it kind of wipes out all the shadows, and you really need to see some of the shadows in order to identify what's going on with that patient and where am I supposed to put this product.
So really, really good advice. Okay, Savannah, it's your turn. I'm very curious, kind of, did you know from a young age that you wanted to enter the same industry that your mom's in? How you got your journey started?
Okay, first I'm going to apologize if my dog starts barking. We're doing our
You're
best
good.
to keep them quiet. But my journey was, I didn't actually originally want to go into aesthetics. When I first started, I started at 18 and I thought, yep, I'm going to do what my mom does. And I took 1 semester of nursing school and was like, yeah, nope, not for me. I was going through a lot of personal stuff and it was really, really difficult. So I was like, yep, nope, I'm just going to go to community college, take my generals, and then go from there and see what I want to do. I ended up then going for my business degree just because I was like, well, this will cover all my bases if I decide to go into aesthetics later, or if I decide to just run with it, because business kind of clicked for me. So I got my bachelor's in business. And at the same time, in my last semester, I actually went for my advanced practice esthetician certification too, because I was working in the spa, sitting front desk this whole time. And I was like, I'm definitely interested in the spa world, whether it's more management side or injectable side. And I then decided at the end of both of those, I was like, yeah, nope, I'm going back to nursing school. So I had an interview actually with Allergan, and I sat down with them and I told my mom, I was like, if I don't get this job, I'm going to go back to nursing school. And I didn't get the job. So I went back to nursing school, and did my 2-year associates, then went back for my BSN. And I am so happy I did because I can't see myself in any other job. I feel like I grew up in this industry and I'm so blessed that I did because I feel like this industry is a little bit more difficult to just break into. So I feel honored that I kind of grew up into it. It just took me a little while to figure out that I wanted to do it.
That's awesome. That's funny that you were first like, maybe, no. And then you're like, okay.
Right. I know. It took me a little bit. I was like, I'm not sure. I saw how hard she worked and I saw a lot of, I went to my first training when I was 10 years old. She said I could skip school if I helped with the front desk check-in. So I was like, heck yeah, I'm doing that. So I was accustomed to a lot. I saw a lot growing up and I was like, yeah, I just don't know if this is for me because I was really woozy with blood. I mean, I still pass out when I get my blood drawn today. So it's interesting how it works. But yeah, I finally decided it was for me. So here we are.
That's so funny. Nurses make the worst patients.
We do. We are the worst.
So when did you start injecting, Savannah? What year was it? I know it was like during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was right as the pandemic. So I graduated in 2020. October, I passed my boards and we shut down again. So I was injecting for like a little bit and then we shut down. So during COVID, my mom and I just did so much anatomy training. We were drawing on my face, her face, my brother's face, and we just were reading the textbook. So we did a lot of training during COVID, but 2020 is when I officially started injecting.
Okay. Because, yeah, I reached out to you on Instagram. You were probably one of the first people I had ever talked to when I was trying to figure out this whole journey because it's not like you can just Google like how to be an aesthetic nurse and like 12 resources pop up. It's a very like involved, like you have to ask a lot of people and you have to really kind of figure it out. So
I do remember that. I remember you reaching out and it's amazing how far you've come. So congratulations. I mean, you've definitely made it. It's a tough field to break into, as I'm sure that you found out, but you're here, you're in it.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of like, I don't really know if this is going to work out for me. Who knows? But it ended up working out. So, Connie, you just finished your nurse practitioner, and then Savannah, you're working on yours, correct?
Correct. Yes. I just finished in August. I graduated 2021, and then I took my boards in November and passed them. And then I now am just finishing up all the licensure. There's a lot of components to like getting your license and then your DEA and your NPI number. So as busy as I am, it's challenging sometimes to fit all the pieces together. But yes, I'm very excited. And Savannah is in hers, which I'm super excited for her.
I am curious to hear your advice for those kind of hoping to do that because do you just not sleep, Connie? Like if you're training, you're injecting, training your daughter, like there's so many moving parts.
Yeah, there is a lot of moving parts. And I'm grateful for the online presence of colleges today. I think COVID not only helped get that started, but also there are some programs that have been in place a long time that were online already. Walden was where I went. And I know there's other programs that people go to, but I was pleased that I could at least take the coursework, the first year and a half. It took me about 2.5 years because I did take mine very part-time because of the training and the traveling that I do. And I did have to let some things go. My house wasn't as clean as it, should be. And, the dishes piled up in the sink sometimes. And I was up till 2 a.m. consistently studying and then getting up at 7 to go to work and do the things all over again. And I would take my studies on the road. I fly a lot every day or every week. So I would study on the plane, do classes on the plane. And then when it came time for clinicals, I think that's when it got just a little dicey because I had to step away from a really busy practice. And I have, 4 different clinics and I'm in a clinic almost every day of the week. So I had to figure out how was I going to do 16 hours per week of clinicals for a year. It wasn't easy. It was really sacrificial for my sleep, for my body. I had to give up a lot of self-love. Working out went right out the door for 3 years and my body showed it. That on top of COVID is like, oh my goodness, I need to get myself back in order. And so some of those things had to go by the wayside. My family didn't see me as much. My kids, thank goodness, Savannah was in school herself. My son was in college, my other daughter's in college. So there was 4 of us in college in the same household and we all moved in together with COVID. They moved home. And so my husband had to find things to do and entertain himself because all of us were in front of our computers studying many times late at night. So we looked like a college dorm over here.
It sounds like a college dorm almost. So Savannah, how is your program going?
We're making it. I feel grateful that I'm in the program, but it definitely is a lot of self-motivation. You have to be ready for it. There's some days that I'm like, after a full clinic day, it's hard to come home and do homework, especially the long papers, but I see the end goal, and I know that if my mom was able to do it, there's no reason that I shouldn't be able to do it. So I kind of look up to her. Well, I do look up to her, and just if she did it, I can do it. So I just keep telling myself that. But the light at the end of the tunnel isn't there yet. I can't see it. So I'm hoping that's soon.
Right. So, in terms of being a newer injector and starting during COVID, you're still probably building your clientele. My concern, with starting a program and like having to step away and do clinicals and, reduce my time in the clinic is I'm starting to build this clientele, but I'm like, okay, so now I can work only like 2 or 3 days a week. And I don't know, just kind of maintaining that clientele.
And that is something that I pre-planned because after seeing my mom have to cut back on her clinic days, which was tough because my mom's booked out for probably a good year, I would say. So having to cut back on her clients was really tricky for the front desk at where we work and then also for her because clients then text and want to get in. So I actually start only 3 days a week. I have my 2 days left open and then I don't work those 2 days knowing that I'm going to be starting clinicals in August of this year, just because that way I can have those 2 days to get my homework done and then move into the clinical days without moving any patients in the future. And I know it's a revenue loss, but I'd rather do that and then add days later than have to move people because like you said, the patients, they go with their schedule. And if you don't have those times anymore, I don't want people to get used to those times if I can no longer offer it for a year.
That's actually really smart. So I do want to ask you, Savannah, being a newer injector during COVID, all the things, what was something that was really hard for you as a newer injector, but you never saw coming? Because there's a lot of things where I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to get into a job and like all these people are going to come see me and I'm just going to make people happy. And like, it doesn't just like organically happen so fast.
Yeah, no. And it's funny that you say that because with COVID, I'm like, I never saw COVID coming. And then injectables after COVID, I feel like that's even harder because of the Zoom situation. Everyone's coming in and is like, oh my gosh, I see everything on Zoom and this tiny little line here. So I think patients are more picky with their treatment, which is hard for a newer injector who's trying to learn. I know it was for me. And then one thing that I ran into within my first year of injecting, me and my mom were talking about this last night actually, was an adverse event. I mean, I know that they're out there and we all hear that they're so rare but they can happen. And you think, okay, yeah, I know how to handle it. I see the textbook pictures. I know what it looks like. But my adverse event was within my first year and I felt completely incompetent. I was like, I'm going to quit. I can't do this. And it was just a really traumatic experience for me because it wasn't textbook. So I think that was a really tough situation for me to grasp. And it made me very cautious going into more filler later. But I'm very thankful for the experience because I know how to handle it now. But man, as a newer injector, that shook me for sure.
Oh my goodness. Do you want to kind of elaborate on the adverse event a little bit just for, everyone listening?
Yeah, definitely. It was luckily at a training session. I feel like my mom always says it always happens over a long weekend or on a Friday. So it was on a Friday training session and we were injecting and I was using a 25 gauge cannula, which we all hear is a lot safer than 27 because it can't pop through if you're gentle with it. And it was in the chin. It was a cannula training for the chin and everything looked great. There was no blanching, no bruising, no pain. But then the next day she had sent another PA that was at the training a picture and she had a little purpling on the lip on the opposite side. Mm-hmm. And we were like, okay, yeah, might as well come in. We flipped her lip down and it was purple inside. So she still had no pain at this point. There was a little bruise, but with the cannula, it's kind of sometimes expected for the bruise. Right. And come to find out, I looked back and I'm like, I bet it was when I actually put the port needle in because the hub backfilled with blood, which usually means that you're in an artery or something. And it was my first cannula experience. And as a newer injector learning cannula, you're already like, oh my gosh, this is stressful because you're just trying to learn needle. But my mom is a big proponent of trying to learn cannula too, because there's a lot of benefits for cannula. But it was definitely a not textbook adverse event, which was hard for me because I feel like I was so cut and dry trying to learn, like, what is an adverse event? How do I notice it? And then every day she would come back and I still couldn't see it. So it made me feel like I was incompetent. And luckily my mom was a wonderful resource through this whole thing. She helped me handhold the patient and helped me do the dissolving. But I feel like she wasn't able to really see it either at first, which was comforting for me, but also it was just a weird situation.
Adverse events are kind of like this, oh, this could happen, and it's more of like a distant thing. And then once it happens, you're just like, it kind of shakes you, your very first one. So
yeah, and I question everything now. I mean, every time I get an instant bruise, I check perfusion like 100 times before they leave. I'm like, sorry, I'm probably making this worse, but I'm just going to keep checking because it just, your mind starts to go like that.
Right. You're like, and I'll give you my phone number. Like, please send me an update in an hour. Like,
yes, totally. I do that all the time. Everyone has my phone number. And if I don't hear from them the next day, I'm like, hey, just checking in, send me a picture of your lips or your chin, just because it makes me nervous. And now it's made me extra cautious, which I think is good. I think adverse events prepare us for the future. And I think that's why I'm so thankful working with my mom, because without her, I would have left it. And I think that that's important for newer injectors too, is to work in a clinic instead of by yourself, because there's power in numbers and there's power with people that have experience. And I'm so thankful that I was with a clinic full of people that had a bunch of experience.
I totally agree. Like, I don't know how people can just go out and just kind of do it. Because I have so many questions all the time. Like, I'm like, who do these people ask? I don't know.
It makes me sweaty just thinking about it. I'm like, oh.
For sure. So Connie, kind of tell me a little bit, you're a big trainer. So I guess how is training your own daughter?
I feel that it was probably the biggest honor that, first of all, a mom can have, to have her daughter want to go into the same field, because there are many, many kids that do not want to go into the same field as their parent. So I feel like it's an honor. There's other dynamics that go on when you have a mother-daughter relationship in business, because it's an unconditional love that I have for my kids. And so working with her, I want to protect her from all the bad stuff that goes along with injecting. And there's some stuff that isn't so great, right? And we can't protect someone completely from the world. And a parent always wants to protect their baby from the world. And so I don't care how old the kid is, a mom always has that kind of instinctual thing. So in business, I need to let go of that and let her trip and fall and figure out her own mistakes, and to see her grow. And she's growing fast. And I didn't get that opportunity as a new injector to grow very quickly, because I had to shouldn't say fight my way in, but I had to figure it out without any teachers. And also I had to figure it out trying to swim upstream with almost like a flood coming in, because people didn't want me to do that. I was against the stream all the time, where it was supposed to be a doctor's job. And then I had to go against the stream to get the training. And then I had to fly to a different part of the country to get training for products that didn't exist in Minnesota and bring them back here. And so I had to invest a lot in myself to be able to find trainings around the country. And that was unusual back then. And then I had to leave a practice because of, being pushed into a corner. And I needed to leave a practice to try to gain some freedom to explore this industry, because it really didn't exist as an industry. We had to make it an industry. And so I then started teaching my competitors within my town, because I wanted them to know what it was. Like, here's what we're doing. And I wanted to have colleagues that knew more about it too in my own space. And so I had to create that. So in essence, I'm so happy that training my daughter in the things that I know, I can leave that legacy behind, and she can become much better, much quicker than I had the opportunity to do.
That's amazing. I love hearing the pride in your voice for Savannah, but also you're such a pioneer within this industry. How do people today, kind of make that leap and bound into more of that training role?
I think people are sometimes born to do certain things. And there are some people that never want to be trainers, and they've been a nurse or an injector for years. I have a nurse that I work with that has been an injector for, gosh, maybe 11 or 12 years. And she would never want to be a trainer. She likes to be in the room with her patients. She's extremely skilled at it. She loves what she does. But being in front of people and having people watch her inject, to her is probably like torture. Like, I don't want to be in front of people. So I think that we're all given certain callings. And I will tell you that I was born into a family. So speaking of your genetics, Savannah's now a nurse. My mom was a nurse. She was an LPN and she was a teacher. And she traveled with my father. We moved every year of my life and we went to 15 different schools in 12 years. And my dad was a pastor. I come from a lineage of art, musicians, teachers, and preachers. And I never wanted to be any of those as a kid. I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to be a photographer. And that was what I thought my world would be. And so I think about all that my parents did, and that set me up for what I'm called to do myself. And so teaching for me, I think, comes more naturally. I'm not afraid of getting up on a stage. I'm not afraid of getting in front of people. Yes, I still have nerves and need to pee 3 times when I'm getting up on stage because it's nerve-wracking to stand in front of your peers that could do this just as well as you can. And they could teach the class too, probably, when you're up in front of this group. But I get to share knowledge. And to me, collaboration and sharing is an honor. And I think that some people are meant to teach and love it and others do not. So just because you're an injector and you're incredibly bright and brilliant, it doesn't always mean that teaching in front of a group or your peers is going to be your next step. But I do know that all of us teach our patients. So within us all, I believe that nursing does go along with teaching. So there's different levels of teaching that happen within our lives as nurses. And if you look at yourself, what you're doing today, you're a teacher too. And so we will all eventually be somewhat teachers and trainers in our world as aesthetic providers.
That's a great perspective. I love that. Yeah, I mean, nurses in general are just teachers. We teach every day to our patients. So I do love that. I do want to ask you kind of, how did the Connie tray become developed?
Well, the Connie tray comes from years and years and years ago when collagen was the only product on the market. Collagen used to come in a little tiny disposable plastic tray, real flimsy little tray that the little 6 vials of collagen would slide into the box. And that's how we opened it up and took our vial of collagen. So they weren't individually packaged like our syringes are today. And so we would take our little collagen syringe out, slide the tray back in, put it back in the refrigerator, and that's how it was stored. These little trays, I started to save them because what I realized is that if I needed to go to another room with the product, or if I needed to line up a couple different treatment, I could put my tiny little tray, I could put a set of gloves in there, some gauze, and I would use those little trays from room to room. Over the years, as I had saved these trays, collagen went off the market. I thought, why don't I just design a tray? Because I need a tray to work with. And now I'm training a lot, and it would be nice to have a tray that these students, we could take it from room to room. We could have our supplies in there. I need it in my room to keep me organized. So I started with all these ideas in my head. Like, if I was going to design the perfect tray for me personally, more selfishly than not, what would it be? So I partnered up with a very dear friend's husband who was an engineer, and he had done design work for other things in his life and had some patents. And I asked if he would help me draw it on the computer because I didn't know how to work drawings on the computer. That wasn't my thing. And I had hand drawn it on a piece of paper with what I needed. I had all my syringes that I showed him. This is how I want it to fit, blah, blah, blah. So he helped me design the first one. So we had a plastic one made, and I would clean it out, would use it. And then I realized, nope, that isn't going to work really well. Let's do a different drawing. Let's do a little revision of this one. So we revised it and we revised it. And by number 4, which took us maybe it was 1.5 to 2 years to get through number 4, I had my nurse colleague, use this for a little bit and see what you think of it. Give me some feedback. And so by number 4, I'm like, this is it. I had Savannah's fiance at the time throw it against the driveway to make sure it wouldn't crack. And so we had all kinds of fun, trying to make sure that this tray was kind of indestructible. And her husband, which was her fiance at the time, he's so strong, he's a fighter, that he was able to crack it by, I don't know how many throws, the 3rd throw.
Yeah, I think it was 3.
So we sent it off to China, had the mold made. I found a local Minnesota plastics company who was willing to work with me on making the trays. And the trays are autoclavable. You can spray them down with any type of medical grade cleaner.
That's amazing. This tray sounds indestructible. I think I need one.
It's pretty indestructible. I just love it.
So Savannah just recently held a, community over competition event. So I kind of want to hear like how that came about and how it really went.
Yeah, definitely. My whole idea behind that event is just to get local people together and newer injectors together. Because I feel like when you're newer, you kind of feel like you're on your own island. I mean, even if you work at a practice, you still always feel like you're like, okay, I'm new, but everyone here has been injecting for 10 plus years. Where do I find my people? Like, when I had an adverse event, I had a group of people, but a lot of injectors locally that I know work solo. So they're newer, but they're working solo. And that's a scary place to be at. And I feel like if we create this new generation of injectors to be a strong foundation based on community, the competition won't stand a chance. And there is a lot of competitive people in aesthetics. And I've seen it over the years, just watching my mom growing up and her being the first nurse in Minnesota to inject. There was a lot of competitive people once this industry became a little more booming. And I didn't want that for my local community here. And I'm hoping that people adopt this idea, then once you get to know people, you feel like you can connect with them. So after the event, I did an Instagram pod with everyone that came so that if they had a question about an adverse event, if they had a question about cheek filler, chin filler, a question about a patient's case, we could all connect with each other and feel like we had a community of support. And then we all have our own communities of support outside that group. So I don't want people to feel like they're ever alone, because that's not a fun feeling, especially in aesthetics when you're working with someone's face. I feel like we have to treat every patient. My mom taught me this, treat every patient like they were your mother. Would you do that to them? I want everyone to have the resources that they deserve to have and everyone to have what's best for their patients.
I do love that. I agree. I think even being in a practice, most of the people that I also am surrounded by have been in this at least 5 years. And so I think sometimes it's hard for them to remember what it's like to be new and to have someone to relate to, because seeing them with like a full schedule and like, they have honed in on their craft a lot of the time. So it's like, all right, well, where do I fit in that? And like, what is my journey and what does that transition look like? Everyone says to be patient, but you're like, for how long,
Which is so true. And that's like why I love that whole community aspect, because now even like in the pod that I'm in, people come with those questions like, hey guys, I'm struggling today. Like I had 10 patients and they all canceled, or I had 5 no-shows. And then we can all feed in like, hey, that was me last week, or that was me the week before. So it makes you feel like that's more normal, because it is more normal, but it's hard when you're in a full practice with people who have been doing this for years and their patients cancel only if they're on their deathbed. So it's difficult to be a newer injector with a practice of very successful people.
For sure. So in your group that you've created, are they people that are all established injectors, or do you have a few people that are like aspiring injectors too?
There is a few people that are aspiring injectors as well, who are nurses, but they haven't really made that step into aesthetics yet because they don't really know how to. So it's fun for them to see. And it also gives them a taste of what aesthetics is like, because I feel like we go in blind at first. Luckily, I didn't because of my mom. But like you said, you're like, when do I get busy? How do I get patients in the door? How will they stay? Some of those things you don't think about until you're working in aesthetics. So it's kind of nice for them to see how in a normal aesthetic practice will go.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely have to reach out to you. I think that would be something great to bring to Washington, because that's another thing. Not having a lot of prior knowledge to the industry, there is a lot of underlying competition. And I hope that it's going towards, there's enough patients to go around.
That is actually something that my mom has always said. She's like, there's enough patients for everyone. So it's just about finding the patients that connect well with you. And that's why creating that community, like if there's something that I'm not sure on, I refer out. I refer to my mom. I refer to other nurses I work with, because there's some things that I know my limits on. Or if a patient's moving, like if I have a patient moving to Washington, I'm going to reach out to you because I know your work ethic and I know that you're in this industry. So I think that community piece is so important.
For sure. So important to know your limits too. I think that being newer, you always like, you don't want the patient to leave your chair, but like safety at the forefront,
Yeah. And it's hard because you're like, oh, I have a patient, but I don't know how to do, cheek filler yet. I don't want them to think that I'm not capable, but I feel like every time that I tell a patient, I'm not comfortable with that and I want you to be in the best of hands, they always come back for their Botox or other things that I can do, and they respect me a lot more because I was able to just turn them down, but also refer to another provider so they're not out the service.
For sure. One of the main reasons that I created this podcast, just because I felt like there wasn't a resource out there, and you get a lot of the same DMs, like, how do I get into the industry? What did you do? What did you read? That kind of thing. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of give your little spiel so then you can kind of refer people to the podcast. Just, you don't have a lot of time either. You're injecting your full-time school, all that.
Yes, definitely. And that is the hard part. I feel like this field is booming right now, and it is perfect for all of these injectors to come. There's room for everyone. And I always tell people that, but I'm also like, don't quit your day job. That's what my mom has always told people in their training. So she's like, don't quit your day job, because it's really hard to be busy at first. And I think they said it takes 2 to 3 years to grow your practice. Mm-hmm. So I think that aesthetics looks so appealing. It looks fun. It looks beautiful. You can pick your hours. But I always tell people, it's not like you can leave your work at work. It's not like you're going to the hospital and then just leaving. It's kind of like you're always on call, because you have those patients sending you texts. You have those patients sending you photos, asking you questions, DMing you. Social media is a huge one. But I just tell people, find a local training facility, which some of them don't have it. So if they don't, I say, these are the books I would recommend. Get a really good understanding of anatomy, because that's what my mom had me do, is read all these anatomy books, really understand it. And then what you do is you just start going to local facilities like medi-spas, plastic surgeons, seeing if there's a need for it. And without a doubt, if they see something in you, they will give you an interview. Even if they don't need someone at the time, they will give you an interview. But if they see something in you, which a lot of them have that eye, there's a good chance that they will hire you and work with you on your training, because once you're at a facility, they usually facilitate training because they want you to be successful. They want you to see clients because that looks good for them as well. So I tell people, just read the books. It's a journey. It's a marathon. And there's some days that I'm like, I'm still at the starting point. And some days I feel like I'm ahead and I'm still falling backwards. So it's kind of like a start and stop industry. You feel like you have everything going for you, and then everything comes to a screeching halt. And you're like, okay, I haven't had a training in 2 months. And now I feel like I can't do cheeks anymore because it's been so long. And so
100%. That's so right.
Right. I know, it's like a start and stop. So I am still running into that. And there's some days that I even feel defeated. So I think that normalizing that it's normal to feel that way, and it's normal to have no idea how to get into this industry, because it's a tough industry to break into. It really is. But if you have the passion for it, don't give up on it, because there is enough room for everyone in this field.
That was great advice. Yeah. I mean, I've only been in the industry, like in my current job, for about 9 months. And, I still go through that. You're like, oh yes, I'm like winning today. And then you're like, all right, never mind. And then you're like, okay, wait, no, I'm winning again. And then you're like,
yes. The world is social media too. I'm like, it's a highlight reel, guys. Like, you're only going to see the good days that people post. So that's another thing that I always try to express is like, you guys see my good days, but I also try to post when I have bad days too, because I want to normalize that we're human. I mean, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have adverse events. We're going to have tough days. And I think that normalizing that will help this field grow as well, because it's not always sunshine and rainbows. There's some cloudy days too.
Right. I mean, this industry is not just fun, know.
Right. And I a lot of nurses are just tapped out, and they've done a great job working through this pandemic. And I completely understand that they're ready for a change. And I think that aesthetics, if you have that passion, go for it. But it's not always fun.
For real though. So the last question I want to ask you, Connie, is, for those newer injectors, or really any injector that's attending a training, and this is probably more for in-person versus virtual courses, but how would someone stand out in a good way?
All right. So if you're at a new injector training, let's say a hands-on, and I get the opportunity to really train a lot of new nurses. One thing that stands out if we're looking for new nurses is looking the part. Aesthetics is aesthetics, whether you like it or not. And it doesn't matter the size, shape, or gender of the human, but we need to make sure that we look the part. We look like we're taking care of ourselves. We're put together. We're dressed appropriately. We're professional. And so those are really, really important keys to if you're looking for a job in this industry and you want to stand out, look the part. Also, there does need to be a passion behind those eyes. You know, when you're at a training, you want to be paying attention. The phone shouldn't be in front of you while you're Googling and doing things while maybe somebody else is injecting. I like to see nurses that are paying attention to the other nurses in the room that are injecting when it's their turn. And they're trying to learn from them. And their noses are way up close trying to see, what are you doing and where are you at? The ones that are sitting back on the corner stool with their phone and they're texting or they're Instagramming during a training, those are the people that will not get the attention and probably will not get the jobs. To piggyback on what Savannah said, you know, there's a lot of resources out there that are actual textbooks that are amazing. And there's some authors out there that are great. Mauricio De Maio has written co-authored books that are on Botox and fillers. Dr. Chris Surik has authored a book on volumization of the face. Dr. Arthur Swift has some incredible information online. And Dr. Sebastian Codafana posts some fantastic Instagram posts on anatomy. And they host live courses. So there's just so many great teachers out there. Dr. Rorik and Pezza wrote a book on facial topography that is fantastic if someone's looking to study anatomy by a textbook. And then there's some classes online too that if people aren't able to get into a hands-on class, there are some classes that offer hands-on injecting so you can see it. And paletteresources.com is a website that offers virtual courses on anatomy and many types of injectables, new injectors, intro to cannula, things like that. So if you're looking to kind of visualize a class online before you actually use a cannula, those are some great ones to take, and they're live. And then your vendors, let's say your office or you want to work with Allergan products or Galderma products or Revance or MERS. Many times if you can connect with your representative, your business development manager that comes in and just say, I'm really looking for a training. Is there any trainings in our area that are hands-on that I could be a part of? Seek them out and talk with them and let them know that you're interested in learning, because if you don't do it, they won't know. And many times those representatives can either design a class based on their budget within your practice if there's multiple providers, or like I teach for all of those companies, and I'll host, let's say, an Allergan class within my clinic at Lifetime, and we just did 2 Galderma. One was for new injectors and one was for kind of more intermediate, a year to 2 year injectors. So I'll host classes where we'll bring in 4 different injectors from different practices. They then get to meet each other and then they can connect with each other because they're in that same kind of level of learning. So connect with your vendors, I would say, is another real great resource for new injectors. And then if you're looking for a job, let's say you don't even have a job yet, but you're looking for a job, even if you aren't hired at a clinic to be an injector yet, but maybe there's a job opening for an assistant or a job opening for even a front desk, to get your foot in the door, to work part-time at a clinic that does injectables, whether it's a dermatology clinic, a plastic surgery clinic, a med spa, those types of places, and put your resumes out there and just try to get your foot in the door if there's one that you really want to work in. And if you can't seem to do that on your own, there's a couple companies out there that help nurse injectors find jobs, and they work with other companies that are looking for. So they're kind of like recruiting companies for new nurses and for just nurses in general, or physicians or injectors. One of them is called Titan Aesthetic Recruiting, and that connections out there in the universe for injectors. And also there's a company called Job Snob, and I partnered with them with my tray as a giveaway because they also work with aesthetic injectors in looking for jobs and helping them find jobs. So think about maybe getting involved with a recruiting company to help. And then ISPAN, so the International Society of Plastic and Aesthetic Nurses, ISPAN, that hosts every year a great big course that is over the span of 3 days. And they're the company that also offers the Certified Aesthetic Nurse Specialist exam that you can take after you've been an injector for 2 years working with a core specialty. That's a lot, but I just thought I'd share all of that with you for your listeners.
Great advice. I love palette courses. I think that they're very, very informative. I've taken a lot of your courses through there. So yes, I 100% agree with all of the things that you were saying. And I think that it's super valuable information for them to hear. So ladies, I want you to tell everyone where they can find, you, where it's the best way to communicate with you, reach out to you, where to find the Connie tray, all that kind of stuff.
My Instagram is probably the best way to reach me. I always say that I'll answer within 48 hours because being in clinic, as you know, Kiana, mom, we're in gloves all day, so it's hard to connect with people during the day. But my Instagram is nurse.savannah.brennan, and then my website is savannahbrennan.com.
And mine is for Instagram, and I'm worse than Savannah. She's usually really great at connecting quickly. I many times will take sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 days to connect back, and forgive me if it's a week just because sometimes I'm on the road in the air. And my Instagram is conniebrennan.np, and my website where you will find all of the trays and the anatomy sweatshirts and policy and procedure manuals and just different things that might be helpful for your practice is conniebrennanrn.com.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you again, Connie and Savannah, for taking the time to chat with me today. This episode turned out amazing. You had some great advice, and I definitely want to do some more duo episodes in the future because this was just so fun to chat with the both of you. To find updates on the podcast, follow the podcast Instagram, which is at aesthetic.chatwithkiki. My aesthetic Instagram is at aestheticnurse.kiki. And on the website, aestheticnursekiki.com is where you can listen to the podcast. You can find some fun apparel, your Botox Baby t-shirts and your icing on the cake tees. The podcast is streamed on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And so I'm telling you guys, the speakers that I have lined up for the future, I'm really excited to chat with them, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say to all of you. So until next time, beauties, bye.